Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Accelerate Your Journey to Improve Customer Satisfaction and Reduce Operational Cost. I'm Diana Davis, editor of PEXNetwork.com. Now, presenting today's webinar is Ronnie Mahabir, who's Senior Manager, North America Call Center Operations at Pitney Bowes. Ronnie has over 2 decades, or nearly 2 decades of experience in managing customer services, working in multiple distributed call centers and back offices, both domestic and outsourced. During his time, he has tried many alternative approaches for getting his teams to operate more efficiently and also provide excellent customer experience. Last year, he implemented a new automated rapid process improvement approach, which brought to the company large savings and improved the quality of customer services. I'm also pleased to say that it was this project that won Pitney Bowes PEX Network's award for Best Process Improvement Project under 90 days, which was announced earlier this year at PEX Week USA. So I'm excited that he's able to be here today to share the details of the project with us. Now, Ronnie will also be joined today. You can probably see him already. That many of you will know from his time at Gartner, no doubt. Jim Sinur is an independent thought leader in applying business process management to innovative and intelligent business operations. He's currently the CEO of Fluresque, and his research and areas of personal experience focus on business process innovation, business modeling, business process management technology, process collaboration for knowledge workers, and an extensive array of other areas. So we're really pleased that both Jim and Ronnie are with us today. Now, just before I pass it over to Ronnie, 2 very quick housekeeping points. First of all, there'll be time for a brief question and answer period at the end of today's presentation. However, you can submit your questions at any point throughout the presentation using the text box that you should see at the bottom corner of your screen. Secondly, if you would like a copy of today's presentation, StereoLOGIC, the sponsor of today's webinar, will be able to send you a PDF copy. All you'll need to do is email Stan Passoff from StereoLOGIC, and he'll forward it along. His email address is stan, S-T-A-N Passoff, P-A-S-S-O-V at StereoLOGIC.com, and his address will also be displayed at the end of the webinar in the presentation. So, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Ronnie.
Welcome, everyone. What I'll do is very briefly take you through the project that we implemented. This project took approximately 29 days. And our key objective with this project really was to improve customer satisfaction. Pitney Bowes had really started focusing on customer responses. We were using our NSAT model, our NSAT platform, and customer satisfaction had certainly become a key operational parameter for us. As well as over the last few years, we've been focusing on reducing operational costs. So those were the 2 key objectives. Over the 29 days, essentially what we were looking at is, what was causing our customer response, our service level agreements not to be met by our frontline agents who depended on our back office essentially to perform certain tasks over a period of time within a certain SLA, which simply was not being met. In addition, what we were seeing was a number of repeat requests from customers. So, we would think that a lot of activities were being completed, but we would see repeated requests from customers over periods of time, which indicated to us that there were definitely error rates. And as we took a look at all of that, one of the things that we did want to do as well is to improve the period of time that it took for us to complete back office transactions. In trying to improve customer satisfaction, one of the key feedback from our customers was we took too long to respond to their requests. in the past, we had used process engineers, we had used the Six Sigma approaches, we had used a bunch of tools, which were quite expensive, in order to develop understanding of our overall processes. However, we use above a dozen different applications that we provide our frontline agents to actually service the customer. Needless to say, within 3 months of documenting those activities, and we make a change in one application, that particular document becomes obsolete. And it became a real challenge for us to keep documenting those activities in the traditional sense. The one driving challenge at this point was we had to reduce costs within a very short period of time, which is what brought us to the StereoLOGIC model to take a look and say, can we do this in that short period of time? Can we document it? And can we develop a process where that document can be maintained with little effort, and it can be done by the people who are operational experts as opposed to having to deal with process engineers? And I have to say that's where StereoLOGIC came in. We were able to successfully do that, and some of the results we got were pretty impressive. We were able to cut customer response time by about 56%. Our error rates, moved from very close to 0%. And our NSAT, our global target for NSAT was 65% as a corporate target. Canada, where we did this pilot, was the only country to achieve that and maintain that for 8 consecutive months in 2013. And in doing this process, we knew that there was no way for us to continue to reduce costs unless we were able to outsource some of our back office operations. We also knew that in order to take the discussion with vendors and our internal stakeholders away from FTE discussion, we would need to develop a cost per transaction model. We also knew that we couldn't develop a cost per transaction model if we had to use the traditional approach. So StereoLOGIC was able to provide us with the platform for developing a cost per transaction model, which allowed us to reduce our operational costs right up front by about 30%. So we had some significant results from all of this. That, in a summary, is essentially the project.
Great, Ronnie. I'd like to ask you some questions about why you did certain things and what challenges you faced, some of the measurable results that you have, which are pretty impressive, and how you plan on moving forward from here, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
The first is, you got the idea that you can't really manage what you can't measure. A lot of companies,
right,
when they do process discovery, they'll sit down and build a war room, and they'll model all over the wall, and they'll create a collective view of their processes, in somewhat a manual way to get buy-in. You went right to the heart of the matter, and you started actually doing actual measurements. What made you be wise enough to do that?
I think, Jim, the key is using the application or seeing the application as a tool. We did not see this as a project. We, in managing call centers, for those on the line who are familiar with Verint, for example, it's a tool. You record calls, you listen to calls, you do evaluations, and then you provide feedback to manage that or to improve the management of that business. We did not approach this as a process improvement project in that sense. We took it as a tool to improve the business. Hence, I was put in charge of it as an operations guy as opposed to a process engineer. If we did approach it, and we did actually. Once we finished the pilot, we actually passed it over to implement in the U.S. And because the U.S. operation is significantly bigger than Canadian operation, we do have process engineers in the U.S. And we put a process engineer in charge. And in truth and in fact, within 6 months, they had not completed even 10% of what we did in Canada. And at the end of it, we sort of laughed about it because I knew that going in, but I had other projects that I had focused on, and we sort of passed this over to that group. But once we got back together, we realized the essential feature of this was to treat the application as a tool. So when we went into this project, I had 2 subject matter experts look at this. So when we had the agents actually record the documents, what they did is when they started to create these swim lanes, is we weren't trying to figure out what we were doing and measure everything and say, this is what exists right now. Here's what we want to exist. As a subject matter expert, what's the right thing? Is this the right thing? Yes, then leave it. If it's not, then record the right thing. And we sliced and diced this, so at the end of it, we had the right process, which we expected to be done by the best agents possible, and with no errors or wasted time built in. And that is the document we printed out and handed to a vendor and said, this is what we expect. Now, when we built the expectation, we didn't expect the vendor to hit that target right away, but we built a model to say every single month you should improve by this amount, and by X period of time you should get there. But we used the tool, as an operational tool as opposed to a process project.
So it sounds like since you were in charge, you didn't have a lot of justification issues like normal folks do, but you obviously had some things that you had to wrestle with. What kept you up at night when you were going through this process? Because I'm sure even though you didn't have to justify it because it was part of your normal job, people were looking over your shoulder looking for, success or failure. So what kept you up at night?
The biggest thing was trying to explain to everyone the cost that we would pay for this software versus the benefits that would come from it. Because obviously, the bigger group of people that I had to present to included process engineers who would take a look at the numbers. On the surface, those numbers did not necessarily drive the kind of savings that is typical of such projects. Fortunately, the operational folks, the folks that I report to are operational individuals, and they do understand the implications. The one good thing about this is we actually had to develop a cost per transaction model, which is something that had never been developed by the organization. It's something that the organization absolutely wanted to, but no one had developed it. So one of the things I did was to focus entirely on that, to say, if I could develop a cost per transaction model, and in doing so, there's 2 things you had to do. One, you had to give a document to a vendor that they can replicate very easily and train, but more importantly, they can use a document to manage the operation. And how could they manage the operation? By actually recording the documents, measuring against the baseline, and then be able to provide feedback to their agents. In a normal back office operation without such a tool, the way that's done is actually having process engineers come in, someone sits side by side. Of course, when you're side by side, the agent does the right things, and you can't really tell what's going on. So the vendors are very reluctant to give you a cost per transaction model in that context. By developing this and actually getting a vendor to actually provide us with a cost per transaction model allowed us actually to convince the steering committee that this project was worthwhile.
Well, it sounds like you took a very fact-based approach. You discovered your processes. It was based on reality, real-time, important measurements. And, I think that's fantastic. And discovering process, and ways to optimize it was, the primary goal and the primary benefit. Were there any intangibles that you gleaned during this process that, maybe helped you assign work differently, figure out different roles that people have, some knowledge that you might want to capture? Were there, subtle intangibles that, you're working on now because of it.
Absolutely. We were amazed at some of the things we saw from, very tenured folks. I'll give you one example. We had one lady who had been with the company 14 years, and she was actually recording a very simple process. And for every one of those processes, we saw her spend, I think it was 2.5 minutes on a specific spreadsheet. And every single time we were asking, why is she spending that period of time on the spreadsheet? So, because it didn't seem to matter with the process. So we did actually have a conversation with the agent afterwards, and we found out that when she was being trained years and years ago, the individual who trained her at that time, one of the applications we use had not been updated to where it was now. And that step was a necessary step back then. This was about 7 years ago. She just kept doing it, not understanding that it had nothing to do with the actual process. And because no one had really sat with her since, which is one of the challenges from a floor support standpoint, we, so we found so many different little things where people were doing stuff and wasting time that it became that simple to fix. We found situations where individuals were missing an application because, like I said, we had many different applications to traverse. They would actually go in and do a name and address change. We had to do four systems. They would do 3 and miss the other one. So what we did is we created an automation process that basically asked the agents questions as they went along to say, okay, did you complete this system? Did you complete this system? So that they are reminded. So we actually remove some of the complexity from or the convolutions from some of the processes. So there were a number of intangibles that came out of it that we were able to fix, like literally, Jim, fix them as we go. They were that simple.
Instant coaching, it sounds like.
Yes.
So, obviously, when you look back at it, you got almost everything you wanted and more. So, looking at what you would have done differently at the surface doesn't seem, logical. But if you had a do-over, would it be, what would you do? Would you include, maybe some of the conversations that people were doing and, recognizing, the speech patterns and maybe emotions and discussing with clients? I mean, if you had that kind of technology, would you use it? What would you do differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we could, one of the things that I know this application is coming out with is the ability to remote monitor live what an agent is doing. If that tool was available, I mean, literally, as the agent is doing something, you can literally stop them, and this can be located anywhere using a chat program. Stop them and say, hey, why are you doing this? Because every single one of those transactions impact our level of our customer satisfaction. Whereas in the front line with calls, incoming calls, you can listen to a call and you can actually intervene with an agent. With back office, it's really not possible. This tool allowed us to do this, and I know the coming addition to the software is something I wish I had, because at that point in time, those agents that were very tenured, doing the kind of work that they were doing, it would have been very, very easy for us to jump right in and stop and actually improve that particular transaction, which, frankly, Jim, we don't know if it ended up in a negative survey for us.
Okay, cool. Moving on to, we talked about your challenges and some of your benefits, and the benefits were quite rich. Obviously, Pitney Bowes has learned a lot, particularly the Canadian division. Too bad us Americans can't learn as well as you guys. But what kind of plans do you have for this kind of technology or this kind of improvement? Are you going to try to squeeze more out, leveraging Six Sigma now? Are you going to do different kinds of measures? Are you going to add more intelligence in the process? Are you going to add, assistance computer-driven assistance for your workers so that, they have knowledge at their fingertips, like putting Watson in the cloud for them? I mean, are you going that far? What are your plans?
I'm glad you asked that because, while our American friends had difficulty at the start, we made the change. We made the change we pulled the process engineer out in terms of leading the project. We put an operational person to lead the project. But what we did with the process engineer was to get them involved downstream. So once we did the very same things we did in Canada, we handed a copy of the printed document to the process engineer, and their job now was to take it and do the very things that you identified. So they actually have a team of people that's going about looking and saying, okay, long term, we understand, we know the process, we know what it is, it's documented, it's with a vendor. What can we do differently? Because the objective for them is to eliminate transactions, eliminate the need for customers to actually call us. So those process engineers are now taking it at the right level, I believe. They're doing it at the right level and then taking it to the next level. And that may include some of the things that you just mentioned, Jim, because we have departments all over the globe. I mean, it's already been used in France, in India. I have a list here somewhere, but a number of countries in PB is already using it, and we have a lineup of departments waiting to use the software. I believe we only have 10 licenses or something like that at this point. But it's going to be used in many different areas, not just back office. Our service organization that is looking at what do different techs do when they go out, what is the steps, how come some techs can get X amount of service requests in a certain period of time and others can't. A difficult thing for us to measure simply because the techs go out on their own. So we have a whole bunch of departments, and the process engineer, I think this is where their role becomes really critical. They're the ones that's going to take our learnings from the back office and say, how do we apply this across the board? How can we develop a tool or a process that will allow other departments to take advantage of the things that we've learned?
Well, this is really great. I mean, it really shows that if you have a reality-based measurement and understanding of the process, you can improve it immediately. But now you have, additional efforts that are going on in a couple of dimensions. One is to make the processes smarter, obviously, and the other is to spread this kind of auditing and viewing of the real process in other domains. So it sounds like, you not only found a big gold nugget on the ground, you found, a whole mine that has a vein of gold in it that you're going to be picking at for the next 10 years, it sounds like. And this is really an impressive case study from my perspective. We hadn't really talked live until we got here, and I'm learning that it's much richer than I expected. And I don't know if you want to make a final comment before we turn it to the people that are listening and answer some of their questions. You have one final comment?
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to say is, given my background in call centers, for those of us who have outsourced operations, especially back office operations, I think this is, our vendors have been, they are so excited by this tool and by what we've done with it, that some of them, I know some of them have already reached out to StereoLOGIC, simply because, can you imagine the ability of the vendor, just not even thinking about, from our standpoint, we can remote monitor our vendors and what they're doing. Not only that, but the vendor themselves can actually go in, record against the baseline what every agent is doing, coach them. And that's the key to a vendor being efficient. On top of that, we ourselves can see that process. We can hold the vendor accountable. And we actually have a basis for negotiating a cost per transaction model. And I don't know about everybody else, but certainly the way we would like to go is to get away from an FTE discussion and focus on a cost per transaction model. Pay for what work is done. And I think that's key for everyone.
Well, thank you, Ronnie. It was really excellent case study. It's much deeper than I thought, And you know, you're thinking on some really strong lines. Since the customer is now king, queen, prince, and everything, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got your finger on, you know, this is where our revenue lift is going to come from. I'd like to turn it over to Diana Davis, who's going to represent some of the questions that came in while you were explaining your case, and we were discussing some of the questions that we had between each other.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you very much, Ronnie. Interesting discussion, and Ronnie, thank you also for the presentation at the beginning. We would like to open it up now for everyone's questions. We've had a few come in already, which I'll start off on because I think it's a great point, probably just to elaborate a little bit more and explain to the audience a bit more about the StereoLOGIC software, Ronnie, that you've talked about quite extensively. What exactly is the StereoLOGIC software? You know, how does it work? Does it analyze speech or the applications used?
You know, I can probably talk to it very well. I know my colleague Stan is probably, you know, one of the best guys to sort of explain the software. But I'll give you a quick summary. It's not Verint. It doesn't deal with it doesn't record speech. But what it does do is record every single step that you perform on a computer. So let's take a back office agent that actually doing 20 steps in a process. And so this agent has to go to send an email. Then they have to go into, let's say, SAP to perform a specific transaction. Then they have to go to our website to input some data. Then they have to send a chat to someone else as part of the process, and finally they have to send an email. Every single one of those screens and every single one of those actions will be captured in picture form exactly as it's done, and then the software essentially spits out a process document. And you know, our subject matter experts typically has to go in and make and do some analysis of it and make sure that the decision points and all of that stuff is proper. But essentially, the software is able to produce that framework for you. So you have very, very little work to do other than to make sure that all the decision points and things are key. So if Stan's on the line, Stan, have I given a good enough summary?
Very good, Ronnie. Thank you very much. It produces your process and measures every step of it. Thank you.
Very good. I might just ask a follow-up question to that, Ronnie. How does it fit into, say, your existing process improvement program, for instance? Are you using with methodologies like Lean and Six Sigma approaches?
Again, like I said, I think the way you use it, if you make the mistake of having it lead process improvement, I think it won't perform the way you might expect. The way we use it is we make it a part of our operation. So it's like Verint. For those who are familiar with Verint, Verint is not a tool that you provide to a process engineer or to the Lean and Six Sigma group that says, here's what you do and here's how you do it. You use it as a tool, and the data that comes out of there is then passed over to the process engineers to use in their Lean and their Six Sigma approaches to say, big picture-wise, here's the framework we need to build in order to improve overall processes down the road. Because what this does is exactly what Verint has been doing for years and years and years. This does it for the first time for back office.
A couple of questions coming here about your transactions. I'll ask the first one first and the second one afterwards. The first one is very much a question of the scope, the number of transactions per month or per year that you're dealing with in the Canadian operation in which you implemented the changes.
Yeah, in Canada, we deal with 106,000 transactions per year, and in the U.S., because keep in mind, we've done this now with the U.S. The U.S. is 95% completed. We do 1.2 million transactions per year.
Started on a smaller scale and rolled it out to the big sites.
Right. And Europe, Europe, which is the next stage of this, Europe has, somewhere like 400,000 transactions that we got to tackle next.
Another question about the transactions is wondering if you might be able to elaborate a little bit around the details of the cost per transaction, such as what were the inputs, such as fixed cost, etc.
Well, that's the good part. I mean, with the cost per transaction model is really based around the vendor. So the vendor, you go out to a vendor and the vendor is going to ask you the normal questions. How many transactions? What is the average handle time to handle those transactions? And therefore, they're going to make a determination. What is the FTE requirement for that program, and they'll determine the cost that comes out of it. The beauty of this is that what we are doing now is we are focusing our internal process improvement people on eliminating transactions. So when our executives come to us in operations and say, we need you to reduce costs, up till this point, what our discussion is about eliminating FTEs, either internally, either onshore or offshore. Our discussion now is about investing in tools, investing in the process engineers to find ways to eliminate transactions, using a tool like StereoLOGIC to drive improvements in those areas. So really, when you go to discuss a cost transaction model with a vendor, it's no different. The difference is you control your destiny. The vendor, it's very easy for vendors to actually have a discussion on FTE, and you're not really sure what's going on behind the scene with some of that. Some of those FTEs are not properly used. With a cost per transaction model, it's entirely based on volume, and you control the volume.
Interesting. Now, I think probably following on from something that Jim said, which was this notion that the customer really is king, and I'm not sure if I've quoted you accurately, Jim, or not, but I think so many of us would like to improve our customer operations and really improve customer satisfaction. In terms of advice that you might give to other practitioners that are out there listening on this webinar, what would you say is the thing that you really think people should be focusing on getting started in moving direct to that in that direction?
I'm not sure I follow your question, Diana.
I'll be putting it a bit more succinctly. Just what would be your key piece of advice for people that are getting started with or going down the journey of trying to improve call center operations?
I would say let it be driven, one, by customer feedback, but two, the back office, I'm not sure how, I would imagine that most operations are set up the same way. There's back office operations which tend to play a big role, but we don't see it. We tend to see everything with respect to the front line, but we don't see the back office impact. I would say you want to have a tool like StereoLOGIC in the hands of the supervisors and the subject matter experts that manage those operations, so that they can actually print out and see exactly what their agents are doing vis-a-vis what they're supposed to be doing and the time frame that they, because remember, when we do this document, we also get a very detailed average handle time. So every single screen that is captured has an average handle time attached to it. So you get an average handle time for the overall process. So you have an agent, a specific transaction where one agent is taking 10 minutes to do it and another agent is taking 3 minutes. So just like in a call center environment where an agent may be talking for 10 minutes and one for 3 minutes, the question you have is the same for back office, which is really difficult right now in the current framework. Whereas with call centers, you can use Verint and you can use all of those tools to measure those. You don't have something like that in the back office. So this allows those folks that are managing the business to really drive quality improvements in the back office where it impacts customers, but you don't really see it very well.
Now, we've got a very specific question that's come in here, and it might be that you don't know the answer to this, so please feel free to pass, but I thought I would pose it, which is a question about another tool out there, Provision Metastorm. A participant asking if you know how Provision Metastorm is, say, different from the StereoLOGIC tool.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with ProVision Metastorm.
Well, I can help with that one.
All right, Jim.
Barge in. ProVision is an architect's tool, and it does, modeling of the business, the technology. It does modeling of the processes, but it's not actually based on the actual logs of what's going on inside of a process. So it plays a great role when, you're trying to understand what you have. It collects a lot of metadata about goals and about processes and about businesses and functions, and it's at a logical level. The difference here with StereoLOGIC, it is actually piping into what's actually going on and can represent what's actually going on instead of logical. So it's the difference between logical and physical. Now, there are some feeds that are being added to ProVision that will match the logical with the physical. How far they've gotten on that, I haven't been briefed recently, but I don't think it's to this level that you can get the instant improvements.
And Jim, I might ask a follow-up question to this. Would you consider this along the lines of, I've heard the term, or in kind of a new technology area, of process mining. Would you consider this to be in a similar vein to those types of tools?
Yeah, this is a process mining, or as Gartner called it, automated business process discovery tools. Yeah, and mining is much deeper than just discovering the process. So yes, it is a key part of that mining set of technologies, and there's a whole set of vendors, suite of vendors that play in that particular market.
Very good. Well, it looks like we're coming to the end of our questions. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, the slides of today's presentation will be made available, and I think we're just scrolling to the end of the presentation to get you the yes. There we are, to get you the email address. So if you do want a copy of the slides of today's presentation, do email Stan Pasov there at StereoLOGIC. He will send you a copy. We'll also be sending out a copy or a recorded version of this webinar in a couple of days, so that you'll be able to listen to the questions, which of course forms the bulk of today's presentation. But I'd really like to thank both Jim and Ronnie for their presentation and their questions today. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
And thank you, of course, to all of you that's attended today's webinar and asked your questions. I do hope that you found it interesting. That is all for today's presentation, but don't forget that for additional process-related resources, including further webinars, podcasts, articles, and more, log on to www.pexnetwork.com.